Owens Corning is a global Fortune 500 company headquartered in Toledo, Ohio, and has faced many challenges and obstacles during its 75-year history. Decades before the Pink Panther, before a new world headquarters, the first challenge was to figure out how to create a new material, something the world had never seen before, something the glass industry was desperate to discover.
The 30s were a tough time for the glass industry. Prohibition had been going on for some time, and that reduced the demand for bottles, and depression came along and hurt demand for everything.
And so the president of Owens, Illinois was trying to figure out what else can we make out of glass and what else can we try to sell.
Owens, Illinois partnered with Corning Glass of New York to create new glass products, and a new way of thinking was required. They hired Russell Games Slayter, an engineer and scientist, based on his theories about creating fine glass fibers. Such fibers would be able to compete against the leading insulating material, a product called mineral wool.
But the quality of mineral wool, which is made from a slag and a rock and kind of a steam blowing process, was not of high quality. It had fibers were not incredibly fine, and that there was a lot of what we call shot, which is little rocks in the material.
Slayter put together a research team, including his assistant, Jack Thomas, and college student Dale Kleist. They helped develop new product ideas, one of which was figuring out a new way to fuse together glass block.
One of the problems with glass blocks was getting a tight seal, fusing them together. And someone had the idea that perhaps we could weld them together with glass.
And this is when Dale Kleist, he was playing around with what they call a metal layer gun. It was generally used for spraying metal onto baby shoes to make them bronze. And they decided to put a glass rod in this.
Thomas came in and watched for a few minutes and said, "How's it going?" And Dale said, not good at all." He said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, I'm trying to weld these blocks together, and I keep making these fibers."
And lo and behold, they were able to get fibers that were unbelievably fine with very little shot and very, very high quality.
Thomas looked at him and got a look on his face, and suddenly he grabbed them, and Kleist told me later, ran out of there like a kid with a new box of toys saying, "Glass fibers, glass fibers."
But they finally discovered a little bit of a process to get that very fine, thin fiber, much like a wool, and that was the thing that really got them going.
It was easier to make the fibers for filters than insulation because they could be a little more coarse. They coated them with a sticky substance that then, as air went through them, dust would stick to the fibers.
The dust-stop furnace filter was one of the new venture's first commercial products. The filters were made at OI's Newark, Ohio manufacturing facility. Newark was also home to Slayter's research and development team, and they were on a quest to mass-produce the new glass fiber material.
They would come to work every day, work like mad, and at 4 o'clock each day, they had a meeting, and they would sit around a table, and they would discuss what went right and what went wrong, and they laid plans for the next day. Now, this is very similar to what kind of Thomas Edison did when he had his laboratory some years before that. And you might say that Games Slayter is really the Thomas Edison of Owens Corning.
Developing a new product is one thing, but producing it on a large scale, marketing to potential buyers, and managing sales takes a different talent. One man who fit the bill also had an interest in this new fiberglass material and its potential.
Harold Boeschenstein was a dynamic guy. He was rising rapidly through the ranks at Owens, Illinois. He was in the laboratory, and he was walking around and came into an area where Dale Kleist was working, and he picked up some of the glass fibers, and he was looking at them, and Kleist didn't know who he was, and he said, "Get your hands off those fibers." That, I think, was probably his introduction to glass fibers, and certainly Dale's introduction to Harold Boeschenstein. Fortunately for Dale, Harold was very interested in glass fibers and the potential that they had as a new material.
In 1938, papers incorporating the fiberglass operation as a separate company were filed. The new company borrowed a name from each parent and becomes Owens Corning Fiberglass Corporation. Harold Boeschenstein was made the first president and general manager of the company, which is headquartered in Toledo, Ohio. The new company adopted the Newark plant as its manufacturing facility. Games Slayter became the first vice president for research and development at Owens Corning and never lost faith in the potential of fiberglass.
Slayter was able to really drive people, and he had incredible enthusiasm, very smart, very tough, and he kept driving people. And he thought fiberglass could do everything but walk and talk. So he was a guy that not only believed in the technology, but believed that we could really get somewhere with it. And he thought that the uses for fiberglass were basically unlimited.
The uses of fiberglass would be tested as the nation went to war.
Materials became very scarce, traditional materials, aluminum and steel. And designers and engineers were forced to become more open to new materials. And that was a big plus for Owens Corning. One of the first products was insulation for Navy ships. That was called Navy board. It was also faced with a fiberglass material that was then painted, so it was not only a good insulating material, but it was fire safe.
Other wartime uses included fiberglass in life jackets, flotation devices, and wire insulation, as well as a very dramatic and necessary object.
They made small parachutes out of fiberglass fabric, which wouldn't burn, and it would allow the flares to drop slowly over the target area.
Harold Boeschenstein was called to Washington, D.C. to serve on the War Production Board, ultimately becoming that agency's vice chairman of operations.
And they basically did production planning for critical materials and made sure that the war effort was supported by American businesses.
They did their part during the war, and new materials like fiberglass helped win the war. But would a post-war nation have any need for Owens Corning insulation products?
But then the housing boom hit, and we had the opportunity to educate a whole generation of Americans about energy efficiency in their homes.
Few executives understand the building material business better than Sherry Bargabos. Sherry has been with Owens Corning for almost half of the company's 75-year history.
Owens Corning has three large businesses: our roofing business, our insulation business, and our composites business. And roofing and insulation make up the building materials segment, and that represents about 80% of the company's revenue.
Throughout the 1950s and 60s, builders relied on Owens Corning for quality insulation and found a helpful partner in the company.
I think what's really special about our company is we basically invented the industries that we're in. So as the inventors of fiberglass, we really created the industries that we now compete.
Owens Corning works with customers to develop new solutions to their problems through fieldwork and analysis.
We take those insights that we derive from that information gathering and take that back to science and technology and say, okay, how can we develop something that would be either the same functionality at a lower cost or better functionality at the same or slightly increased cost.
We'll do innovation days with our customer where we'll walk them through all our mimic labs, and we're able to show them how we can take our materials through different conversion processes to make the product better for them.
Throughout the first decades of company history, Games Slayter and his team were housed at the Newark plant, but soon they would have to find a new home.
It was in 1959 when an unbelievable thunderstorm, unbelievable flooded the plant in Newark, Ohio. All the facilities, all the records, just about everything, all the equipment was a shambles.
A few years earlier, Owens Corning had acquired farmland near Newark in Granville, Ohio. Slayter's team first moved into an old converted barn, but soon the site would become the new home of research and development.
Groundbreaking occurred soon after that flood, and about a year and a half afterwards, about September of 1961, is when they had about 3 or 4 buildings on that site. They dedicated the technical center, the Owens Corning Technical Center, to Games Slayter.
The spirit of innovation that Slayter brought to the company continues to this day.
I've been involved in several poster sessions with our R&D teams, almost like a science fair project, where you go around and people talk through some of the new ideas they have for specific opportunities.
Well, Owens Corning has always been known in the construction industries for investing in building science. How do you actually build a better structure, and how do the different components of a home, the wood, the drywall, the insulation, the roofing, the sheathing, how does all of that work together?
In addition to building materials, Owens Corning produces fiberglass products from what is known as composite material.
Well, the composite side of the business is where we take glass and we form it into very, very fine fibers. And those fibers can either be wound on a spool, or multiple fibers could be wound on a spool together, or they could be chopped into small strands.
And they have what is called polyester resin, which is a kind of a thick liquid, but they can spray it. Now these two materials, glass fiber and polyester resin, come together using this spray gun onto a mold and laid down. And this is what they call fiberglass reinforced plastic. The plastic by itself, the polyester resin, would break easily. But when they spray the glass with it and they roll it out, they make a laminate, maybe around 1/8 of an inch thick, and it become a boat hull.
Fiberglass reinforced plastic revolutionized the marine industry and was soon found in many products: fishing poles, housewares, durable chairs, and eventually automobiles.
Well, the big breakthrough came about 1952 when General Motors decided to build the Corvette. And they decided to build it all out of fiberglass reinforced plastic.
The first Corvette was Owens Corning with MFG, and even today when we go visit with MFG, they love to tell me the stories of how their grandfather or father worked with Boeschenstein here to get that car converted to glass, and they have the car in their lobby, and it's a very inspiring story.
The company invented a major improvement on a familiar product using composite technology.
Owens Corning actually invented the fiberglass shingle and introduced it back in the late 70s. And prior to that, shingles were made with paper, with what was called organic felt.
Owens Corning found that manufacturers were not interested in changing their production lines, but the company believed in the fiberglass reinforced shingle and found a way to introduce it to American homeowners.
In 78, 79, bought Fry and Trumbull. And this was a big asphalt company and a big shingle company. So I think Owens Corning decided, hey, if you're not going to put them in shingles, we're going to buy the shingle companies, and we're going to put them in.
The industry was changing, and the leadership was changing. Russell Games Slayter died in 1964. Harold Boeschenstein retired in 1967, but remained on the board of directors until his death in 1972. Owens Corning was then led by General Loris Norstad, the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO forces in Europe. When he retired, a familiar face with a familiar name became the leader of Owens Corning.
I didn't work very much with my father. In fact, when I joined the company, I realized that I was in sort of a unique position.
Bill Boeschenstein worked first in the Newark plant and then sold Owens Corning products for decades before leading the company. It was time for new ideas from a new generation, and also time for a new headquarters.
Different departments were farmed out to various buildings, and so it was not certainly an ideal way to house the headquarters. That was the genesis for the building and the occupancy of the fiberglass tower.
The new building brought new energy to the company, just as the nation entered an energy crisis.
People became much more conscious of how much it was costing to heat and cool their homes and how much energy they were using.
So Owens Corning took to the airwaves and asked the American homeowner to spend a weekend in their attic, to spend time insulating their home, to make their home more energy efficient.
One of the most memorable, I think, was an ad with the tagline, insulation is cheaper than oil.
Look, here's a few $100s worth of pink Owens Corning fiberglass. Add a 6 to 12-inch blanket to an average uninsulated attic, and look what you'll save on heating and cooling in the next 20 years. Get pink Owens Corning fiberglass insulation, the best way to cut energy costs. Insulation is cheaper than oil.
So we started a television promotion and used a very nice fellow that did quite a good job, really, but it wasn't very exciting.
So I decided to promote the pink aspect of the product. One of the first things they did was hire the Pink Panther.
I didn't want to tell them that I didn't know who the Pink Panther was. So I asked them if they would go out and do a survey. And it turned out, of course, that the Panther was known by every age group. I finally asked my mother, who was then about 90 years of age, whether she knew the Pink Panther. And she said, well, of course I know the Pink Panther. And so we approved the Pink Panther as our spokesman and took it from there.
One of the first Pink Panther ads that the company did talks all about how fiberglass insulation is a great product. And at the end of the commercial, the narrator says, and best of all, it's pink.
Since then, we've now had 2 or 3 generations of homeowners who associate Owens Corning, the color pink, and the Pink Panther with improving the value of their home and making it more energy efficient. We benefit from that today.
Pink. It all began as a simple color, added to the glass fiber as a way to differentiate superior grade insulation from other lines. Eventually, Owens Corning would be the first company to trademark a color for use in a product. Americans began to associate insulation with the color pink. And during the oil crisis, the reputation of Owens Corning as the industry leader led to a remarkable opportunity.
And right around that time, they had discovered oil, the northern tip of Alaska. And that's great, but they needed a way to get it down to the southern tip of Alaska so they could get it into refineries in America. And so the decision was made to build the Alaskan pipeline.
We had talents within our company that were compatible with some of the engineering problems that related to the design of the pipeline. It had to be insulated.
And it worked, so they can send, oil through the pipeline at elevated temperatures, even in the wintertime, and has been very successful, and that insulation is still going today.
While Owens Corning was helping the nation deal with the energy crisis, the company was facing a financial crisis of its own.
I think everyone knows that one part of our corporate history is in primarily in the 1960s, Owens Corning sold some products that contained asbestos. And during that period of time, we sold products that ultimately in their use injured people and created a liability for the company. And I think the company tried for a very long period of time to do the right thing, which is meet the needs of the people who we harmed, while at the same time continue to fund our operations in a way that we could grow and make Owens Corning a vibrant company.
There were a few lawsuits filed by workers who were hurt by the asbestos dust that they encountered in the workplace. When you sawed and fabricated this Kalo insulation, it created a dust that would have some asbestos fibers in it.
Eventually our asbestos liability got so large that our only real solution was to have a court-supervised workout of the liabilities. So really when you talk about a Chapter 11, what we were really asking the court to do was, let's bring all of our creditors in the room together so that they can all have a fair deal.
What this allowed the company to do was keep operating as a viable company. It was temporarily relieved of its obligations, financial obligations for these lawsuits while they worked out a trust. And the trust was funded to compensate people who were harmed by the company's products. Billions of dollars were poured into the trust. Eventually, the company in 2006, in October 31st, actually the same day the company was founded, emerged from bankruptcy.
We finally got ourselves into a position where we could manage the liability into the past and emerge as a new company. And I think that all came together on that magical day in New York where we went and rang the bell and said, world, here's the new Owens Corning.
A financial crisis of another sort threatened the company in 1986 during the era of corporate raiders.
Summer of 1986, Owens Corning found itself a target for a hostile takeover attempt. The Wicks companies decided Owens Corning was a good target and made a tender offer for shares of Owens Corning stock.
50% of the company's stock had once been held by its former parent companies. Owens, Illinois had sold its shares long ago, and now that Corning Glass had sold its stock, the the company found itself in a vulnerable position.
They made a bid that was substantially higher than the existing stock price, and so we had to come forward and in effect outbid them. So we worked diligently with banks to come up with a program that would in effect advantage the existing shareholders to the point where they would turn down the WIC's proposition.
The company took on about $2.5 billion worth of debt.
The investment community thought it was wonderful, and they benefited by it. The shareholders did, and the new investors did fairly well for a while too.
Bill Boeschenstein was widely regarded as a hero. He was chairman at that time, and he led that effort, leading what was called a recapitalization and a restructuring, and keeping the company headquartered here in Toledo.
Despite the many challenges that Owens Corning faced, it was clear that it was time to seek a new world headquarters.
Well, in the mid-90s, I think we looked at our prior headquarters, which was here in downtown, and it's a very tall skyscraper building that I think is evocative of what was a modern headquarters in the 60s and 70s.
And the company stayed there for, I believe it was 25 years. Staying in the fiberglass tower would have required a lot of renovation.
So the vision of Glenn Heiner, who was our CEO in the 90s, was that we could build a campus-style building, that we could build it in downtown Toledo. And I think everyone always had their eye on this waterfront property. What a beautiful place that would be to create a campus that would be an integral part of downtown, but would also be a place that was special for our people.
In 1994, Owens Corning selected a new site for its world headquarters on the middle grounds along the banks of the Maumee River in downtown Toledo. The company moved into the new facility in 1996.
I think it is a very collaborative space. So the way the building is set up is we have an office environment, which is in this area we call the ARC. And in the office environment, we obviously have an open floor plan, which I think most contemporary companies have today.
Innovative gathering spaces and a central courtyard create a work-friendly environment.
This building is certified under what's called LEED, which is an energy efficiency design designation. And obviously, as the world leader in insulation materials, energy efficiency and being on the forefront of building efficient construction is something that's very important to our company.
And there's platinum, gold, silver, other standards. And so it's your commitment to build a building or a facility to the top requirements so that it has the minimal impact on the environment.
The ultimate renewable is not using the energy at all, and we call that a negawatt. So Owens Corning's always been in the business of trying to sell negawatts, and obviously when we built a building, we said this needs to be a showplace.
The company's leadership in energy conservation and material manufacture led to new innovations in alternative energy.
The wingspan of a windmill is the wingspan of a 747 jumbo jet. And those blades are made primarily out of fiberglass reinforcements.
In order to have a good wind blade, you need to be able to make it where it is stiff enough, light enough, and corrosion resistant.
There are multiple layers of glass that get placed in a mold. It's literally a fairly manual process, but then those two blades are placed together and they form the blades that you see on a windmill.
So we've been in a development cycle now probably for the better part of a decade, working with the blade manufacturers, bringing them material science capability, bringing them glass chemistry capability to help them design longer, better blades. And each time we do that, the next generation of windmills that come out are more efficient, capture more of the wind, and have lower cost, and make renewable energy more competitive with other types of energy sources.
Although maintaining a network of facilities across the globe, Owens Corning remains committed to local initiatives.
I think that's part of the company's DNA, and it started with Harold Boeschenstein. He served the community. He was very active in the Toledo Museum of Art. That was the most visible part of his support in the community. He was very active in the community, and I think that sends a strong signal.
We've been very successful in being one of the top corporate contributors to United Way over the years. We're also very involved with Habitat for Humanity.
Another strong signal is the company's support of the LPGA golf tournament. It's been held in Toledo for many, many years and sponsored by Owens Corning at some level. That event has given over $7 million to children's charities.
I think Owens Corning's people look at that as one of the privileges of being big and known, that if you're going to work for a prominent company you have the opportunity to carry yourself in the community in a prominent way. And we challenge our people every single day to make sure that they're relevant and important to the communities we work in, and that we make those communities stronger and better.
The 75-year history of Owens Corning is a story of discovery, of challenge, and innovation. The next 75 years will most certainly honor the past and look to the future.
You know, I like to think of us today, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and they gave us the baton. Well, then we'll give the baton to the future generations, and they can drive it forward.
And I think that spirit of ownership, that spirit of leadership, that spirit of Owens Corning being a special place and being special to our customers and being special to our industry started 75 years ago, has been with us every day ever since, and it's something we endeavor to have be a part of Owens Corning for the next 75 years.